There we go. When and where were you born?
When and where? I was born in Liverpool, April 8th, 1954, at the old hospital in Liverpool, Queen's General.
What do you remember about your early childhood?
What do I remember about my early childhood? Well, I remember liking to be outdoors. Before school, or before I started school, or
Before you started school, after you started school, in between school, all the time.
like being outdoors, made a lot of the things. We made our own things, like we had a golf course that we made in back of the house, and we mowed the grass, and we played golf in the back of in the field. We even had a golf course down on the old sawdust pile where the old mill used to be. We took and raked up the sawdust, and we made golf clubs out of wooden sticks and used sponge rubber balls, and we played golf there. We made our own ball field. We did all that stuff, and I liked being in the woods, snaring rabbits and stuff like that. Making kites. We made our own kites. Flew them in our backyard. We had didn't have a kite string, but we used our fishing rods. And on a windy day, we'd put our kites up and fly them.
What was the occupation of your mother and your father?
My mother was the postmistress. She actually took over the postmistress job, which now Dolly has. When Dolly took it over when she couldn't do it anymore. My mother took it over when my grandmother couldn't do it. And my father had a few different jobs. He sold insurance. He was a Watkins salesman. He worked at my Uncle Dell's store down in Mill Village, and he was a steward at the Legion in Liverpool.
Describe the house that you grew up in.
Well, that house is still standing. It's right next door to the post office. And my bedroom looked out on the back side of the house towards where the mill is now. And it was cold in the wintertime. Didn't have much insulation, but my dad fixed it up and redid the inside of it and put insulation in. We had always had a wood furnace, but then in later years he put an oil furnace in, and we always used to have to cut wood and pile it and haul it in. It was always something to do. Nice thing about the house, where that house was, in the summertime, you could look down at the falls right there in Greenfield, and you could look upriver. You could see who was fishing, and you always had a nice breeze there in the evening.
What was it like during the holidays?
Holidays? What do you mean, Christmas?
Any holiday you want to explain?
Oh, we only had a couple holidays at that time. Christmas was a fun time because there was always people in. We used to go and eat Christmas dinner with Bruce and Hilly and Lloyd Hunt, and then they would come to our house for New Year's dinner, and every year we would change that around. It was always either one or the other in the alternate years. I loved Christmas dinners too. My favorite part of Christmas dinner was apple pie and coffee, ice cream for dessert.
What were your usual meals?
Peanut butter and something. peanut butter and pancakes, peanut butter and potatoes. Corn chowder. Didn't have peanut butter on my corn chowder. But we had cabbage rolls. Do you know what a cabbage roll is? My mom used to make them.
What were your jobs around the house or your chores?
Always keeping the wood box full. Looking after that. Putting the wood in the basement for the furnace. And making sure that there was always wood in the wood box. That's all we ever had to worry about back then.
How did you spend your free time, or right now, how do you spend your free time? Like when you were younger or now?
Free time when I was younger, I spent mostly in the woods or playing, riding my bicycle. I had a new bicycle when I was 12 years old. I got my first new bicycle, and we rode that everywhere. Well, back then that's the only transportation you had, bicycle or walk. But now, free time, like doing things for people.
What was your schooling like?
We went to the old Greenfield school, started in grade primary, went there until grade 6. There was a whole bunch of teachers when I first started. I remember a few of them. Some we only had for 1 year, some we had for 2 years, but Mrs. Freeman, Aline Freeman, and the other Mrs. Freeman, which would have been Alice Freeman, she was a teacher those were the two main teachers that we had that were there for the longest.
What was the first car that you remember liking?
The first car I remember liking. Well, I liked all the old cars I liked were Dodge Swinger or Dodge Roadrunner, one or the other.
Did you have a radio or television? What did you listen to or watch?
Well, we had TV, black and white TV, and in 1966 we got a color TV. And radio, listened to the radio at night. There wasn't anything much to watch on TV, a few old shows, but basically at night you could listen to AM radio, and you could get the Boston Celtics games on the AM radio in the wintertime, and in the summertime you could get the Red Sox games, because there was never any basketball or baseball on TV at that time. The only thing that was on TV mostly was golf or football or hockey. Hockey was the big thing, hockey night in Canada, Saturday night.
What is your favorite kind of music?
Favorite kind of music? Well, I like a lot of older style rock and roll, but modern country. But starting to like the Christian music now. There's a lot of nice songs in there.
When did you get married and how old were you?
21 when I got married. 21, yeah. 1975, July 19th.
When did you start a family?
In 1979.
Did you play any sports?
Anything to do with sports, we played. Baseball, softball, golf, hockey. We didn't have organized leagues like they have now, where like hockey we would go and clean off an ice patch in any place that there was ice on the lake or in the bogs, and baseball and softball, and we just did anything. We didn't play soccer. Soccer wasn't a big sport back then. Not like it is now. You needed a big field to play soccer, and there wasn't enough people usually. But I like golf a lot.
Was life easier or harder Was life easier or harder now, or was it easier when you were younger, or easier now, or harder then?
I think life was at that time was a little bit easier because it was more relaxed. It was not as fast paced as it is now. There's too much. How can I put this? People want everything like that. Back when you didn't have much, you waited till you could buy something and then you bought it. You'd saved your money up and bought it. Now, what happens is you want it, you can get it alone, pay, and then things, it's easier. It's easier to get things now, but it's harder to pay them off.
I find now that people they just want it because their friends are having it, right?
Well, you know what? That's basically it. What people want now is not necessarily what they need.
Yeah.
Right? Back when we were growing up, if you needed something, it was a little bit different. If you wanted something, well, you might wish on it and get it, but usually you didn't.
Who are your heroes or role models?
Who was my hero and role model?
It could be off of television too, right?
Oh, it was always a sports figure. We didn't. The Red Sox had a player by the name of Carl Yastrzemski, who was a big, baseball player. He was at the time. The Blue Jays weren't even thought of then. Like the Blue Jays weren't a baseball team until in the 80s. So we always had, but hockey players, like we always liked to think that we were like Frank Mahovlich or Gordie Howe or Bobby Hull, like Bobby Orr, all those hockey players. There were a lot of good ones.
What was your favorite meal?
My favorite meal? Was corn chowder. Does that make any sense? No, something that I always liked. It's easy to make.
Well, what were the big news stories that you remember?
Well, big news stories. That takes in a long, long list of things. I think the biggest news story was the first man landing on the moon back in 1969. Neil Armstrong. It was on, if I remember the date, I think it was August the 31st or whatever, when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. They had pictures. That was a big story. The other one I remember was John F. Kennedy when he was assassinated. That was a pretty sad day. Things I remember that.
Who was the first Prime Minister that you remember?
The first Prime Minister that I remember, Lester B. Pearson.
Do you have any friends that you had back in childhood?
Yeah, there's lots of friends around now that we grew up with that are still around. And yeah, there's quite a few.
What do you remember about your grandparents?
Didn't remember anything. My grandmother, I had two grandmothers. Both my grandfathers had passed away on both sides. My grandmother Freeman was the one that taught me how to play cards, and she lived in the same house with us, and she was a kind person. I remember everyone said that she always let me win at cards, but that wasn't true. My grandmother Kenny was a little bit different. She was brought up she had a hard life, and she always seemed to, she was a little bit harsher. I remember one time when I was visiting her, and they were digging a well next door, and they were putting dynamite in the ground and blowing it out to get the rock out of the ground. And we were outside playing. I was playing with my cousins, and I found $1. Now, $1 back then was probably like finding a $100 bill. And my grandmother made me take it to someone and give it to them, and that was, she didn't know whose it was, but she made me give it to someone because she said it was too much money, I couldn't keep it.
If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Well, all the hatred that there is in the world. I mean, that's, people just hate each other. They hate people for no reason at all. They hate them because of what color they are, or how much they have, or what they think that some people are just jealous. Some people don't have any idea what they really need. It's all this want stuff.
Mm. How has the world changed in your lifetime?
It's become too much information. Like, I mean, it's growing. Like, the information is expanding so fast that you can't keep up with it.
Mm.
It's like, one day you think that you have the best computer or the best phone, and then the next day it's outdated. You haven't got the best. It's like always this constant change. Nothing seems to be good enough or fast enough.
Mm. Do you have any advice for young people today?
Yep. Go to school, get a good education, go to work, and don't get yourself in too much debt.